Today we'd like to welcome current US President Donald J. Trump to Memphis, Egypt, the greatest city in Egypt.
Hello there. I'm greatly excited to be here today.
Donald, the people want to know. It is the most debated question in Egyptian history, but I believe you have the answer. Who was the greatest pharaoh of Egypt?
As many people know, I do a lot of research on many things, including pharaohs. And trust me, I know a lot about pharaohs. And if I ever had to choose one to be the best, it would have to be Menes. He is by far the best pharaoh of Egypt.
Menes, the first pharaoh, the uniter of Egypt, the greatest and best? You are smarter than you look, Mr. Trump.
Yes, that Menes. Believe me, when I talk about pharaohs, I know what I'm talking about, and he is the best. Me and him shared many great ideas, such as building a wall. Of course, his wall was to keep out water from flooding his new capital, Memphis. Mine is to keep the Mexicans out, but we share many ideas overall.
That is a very interesting viewpoint, Mr. Trump. A lot of people would agree, but
Trust me, he is the best. He basically united two cultures through peace and might. Truly phenomenal, just like I did with the USA. Each of us great leaders. He allowed the Egyptian people to develop their own minds, their own culture. He allowed them to build stuff. He allowed them to brew beer, to garden, all things we enjoy today. Truly a big game changer. Along with unification, Menes also phenomenally increased trade. Amazing. Just like I did with China. He also increased many big game changers, such as wearing a hat that represented both nations, red and white, each one representing another one. My hat, the Make America Great Again hat, is red and white. An amazing coincidence, I know.
So, Mr. Trump, now you're a businessman yourself, like a real businessman. I hear you own a lot of the towers back in America. But can you give your insightful opinion on how Menes did economy-wise in ancient Egypt?
Economically, Egypt ruled the world under his control. No one could even compete with him, not even China.
Did China exist back then, Mr. Trump?
Can we please stay on topic? Back to Menes. He increased the economy phenomenally, like I said before. He made a strong center in Memphis, along with building many other cities, each one very economically powerful.
So, Trump, many people viewed Menes as a religious god. How do you view Menes' affection on religion in Egypt?
Once he conquered Egypt, he formalized their religion and brought in many religious practices. But moving on, according to legend, he rode on the back of a crocodile to escape a pack of rabid dogs. All great leaders ride on the backs of animals. He rode on a crocodile, Putin rides on a bear, Napoleon rode on a horse, and I myself, I ride on an eagle.
You ride on eagles? Isn't that impossible?
No.
Mr. Trump, those are amazing stories. Now, is there anything else you'd like to say about religion?
Of course, there is more to talk about. I do a lot of research on things about this. Don't question my knowledge. On his military quest, he brought order to where there was once chaos. Everywhere he went, order everywhere. It was amazing. It's quite interesting, though, that a hippo killed him, a creature that represents the god of chaos. What a great coincidence, or terrible one, depending on how you look at it. Oh. Another big game changer is his ability and take on balancing other religions. He allowed them to celebrate their religion, even holding festivals for them. That's very phenomenal, if you ask me.
So, Mr. Trump, moving off from religion, I know your country spends the most amount of money on home defense and military. How did Menes do in military-wise?
Just like me, Menes started with very little. He built up his empire from basically nothing. Did you know to build up my billion-dollar company, I only started with a small loan of $1 million? I know, amazing. But back onto Menes. He did so much. He started with nothing. He conquered the surrounding cities, first conquered the south, then the north. He then went on to build the first navy ever. Truly a huge game changer.
Yep. So, Mr. Trump, I'm hearing a lot of great stuff about Menes, and quite frankly, I don't think they deserve this title at this point anymore. But what do you think of the other pharaohs?
Sorry, can I go again? Those clowns were all disasters. Every single one of them were terrible compared to Menes. We even see modern day's examples. As dynasties carry on, they get worse. Each generation terribly worse than the last one. The modern day examples, of course, is I like to call him Rocket Man, but you may know him as the Kim Jong-un dynasty. Terrible dynasty. Terrible. We can even see this with modern day movies. It's a trend. The Pirates of the Caribbean movies, they started off great. You know, the first one, I was like, wow, a huge, great step for movies. The second one, I was like, oh, okay, it's a good sequel. But since then, it's been terrible. Nene, yes, he was the greatest. You know what's really sad about history? Some things are lost, like the Moabite Stone, very important to our world. But you know, some things we just can't get rid of, like Ramses II, truly a useless person. And then there's those other people who are even more useless, such as King Tutankhamun. He was so irrelevant that thieves didn't even want to dig him up. I mean, really, why do we even praise him nowadays? Useless.
Those are some interesting ideas, Mr. Trump. But I like to ask you about two other praised pharaohs by fake news, Cleopatra and Djoser, the one who built that pyramid accordingly.
Two more people I don't even understand why we praise. Cleopatra, you made a terrible decision which lost you the entire race. You should honestly be locked up for that decision. Turning on the Romans, terrible. And finally, Djoser. You man, you did nothing. Irrelevant. It was all Imhotep. You get all the credit. You shouldn't get it. I'm sorry, but you're fired.
Well, thank you, Mr. Trump. From me, like personally, and I think every person in Egypt who's watching this, you've opened our eyes. Your research on Egypt is basically better than anyone in history. Thank you. I hope that you return soon.
Thank you very much for having me. May I just say, Egypt is a beautiful country, and I mean really beautiful. Anyways, is that all we have today?
Yeah.
Well, on that note, Eagle!
The Uniter of Egypt? I kind of forgot the rest.
Along with unification of Egypt, he also implemented many big game chambers, such as increasing trade phenomenally, just like I have with China. Everyone wants to increase his relations with other nations huge, just like increasing trade like I did with China, another huge country. Gotta put those huges in China in there.
So, Mr. You view the religious things that... Okay.
But it was quite weird, or coincidence, I think. I have no idea where I was going. Another big game chamber. Oh. Another big game chamber.
Should never be found. Like what is it? Like King Tut's, what is it called?
Tomb?
It's like fame for doing nothing, for dying. Fame, what? What are you doing?
And go. Another big game changer is his take on balancing religions. He allowed those of